bring in somebody who also understands about hidden hands. Brilliantly so, I should say. Here he is, Mark Devlin. Mark Devlin, you do understand about hidden hands, don't you?
Just a little bit, Sonia. Yeah, it's become my life. It's not the way I planned it. But yeah, this is pretty much all I do. Dig up this stuff and put it in books and put it in public talks and stuff because somebody's got to be doing it, right? And I seem to have drawn the short straw.
Well, you've drawn the short straw, you say that, but, you know, in the fullness of time, Mark, you'll be seen as a national hero. And so that's something to look forward to, isn't it? Everybody, if you're not familiar with Mark Devlin is, well, he's many things. He's a speaker, he's a DJ, he's an author.
I've been called many things.
You've been called many things, but today you're here to talk with me about Sean Puff Daddy Combs. Now, this is somebody who you know of very, very well because, like me, you have a history in hip hop.
That's right. And you can tell those that have been around since the early days because we still call him Puffy. So,
That's so true.
right. I mean, to us, he'll always be Puffy, Puff Daddy.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, the newer generation might know him as Diddy, P Diddy. I don't know where these ridiculous names come from.
Him.
I mean, well, yeah, Diddy is one step away from Diddley. So maybe a clue.
Yeah, might be a clue, right?
But yeah, whatever you call him, Sean, Puffy Combs, Puff Daddy, P Diddy, whatever his bloody name is this week. I'm very surprised to see that he's been arrested. So this is
wow,
a development since we last spoke. Because when we last spoke, what was it, about 3 weeks ago, something like that?
Yes.
He was still walking around a free man.
Yes.
And I said, my biggest concern is that he's just going to be let go and this whole thing is just
I remember.
out. And I was very surprised to see that he's been arrested and he's being held in custody in apparently New York's worst jail. It's the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which is described as New York's worst jail. The conditions there are said to be horrific. So it's a very far cry from all these mansions and this champagne sort of bling lifestyle that he's used to, if indeed he is being held, but we'll assume he is.
Right.
And so the biggest fear now is that he's either going to be cleared of all these charges against him, but I think that's very unlikely, given that at last count, there was something like 120 separate charges being leveled at him. I don't know how you walk away from that, even with the highest level protection and connections. So now we have to hope that we don't have a popular internet meme, which goes, P Diddy didn't kill himself. He's being described as the Jeffrey Epstein of hip hop, and we know how that affair ended with Epstein. We're told, oh, he killed himself in jail. And that's the end of it, really, because, you know, we can't find out who he was affiliated with. He's gone. It's too late. It was very similar to Jimmy Savile. Excuse me, my stupid phone.
Happens to the best of us, Mark. Happens to the best of us.
Yes. Okay. Let me just try and turn this off. Over to you, Sonia.
Well, you know, so the thing is, I think the whole thing is very curious. Obviously, he's been charged with trafficking, racketeering, and more. As you say, hundreds of civil lawsuits now. Big names to be announced. What is going on with Mark's phone? And it could be anybody, from royalty and presidents to actors. And but I'm very interested in some of the people, Mark. I'm very interested in some of the people who enabled Puffy to make his name and to be as big as he is. And one of the people I'm very interested in, because I think that one day the spotlight is going to fall on him big time, is Clive Davis. Do you have any thoughts about Clive Davis?
Absolutely. And I was going to raise him if you hadn't, because
I thought you would, you know, because he's one of those people that people like you and I know is a hidden hand, right?
Well, totally. And Clive Davis has been around forever. I think he's been in the music industry since the 1960s. He was signing acts even back then. And he's credited with discovering many artists and putting them on the map, most famously probably Whitney Houston, but many, many others from cross genre, not just black music, but, you know, rock and country and all sorts. So Clive Davis is an incredibly powerful man in the music industry, big mover and shaker. And he's the guy that put Puffy on the map. So he enabled him to have a career, become a celebrity, get put in the public spotlight, and therefore go on to commit all these things that he's been accused of. So Clive Davis ran Arista Records, and a subdivision of that was Bad Boy Records, which was given to Puffy as an imprint. So Puffy cut his teeth at Uptown Records, which is an imprint of MCA, and he worked there with acts like Mary J. Blige and
Yeah.
Jodeci.
Oh, yeah.
And he put Notorious B.I.G. on the map very early on in '92 when he guested on a Mary J. Blige remix. And then Biggie went on to have a massive career on Puffy's Bad Boy Records label when it launched. But Clive Davis is the one that allowed Puffy to gain all that power and get to this level of prominence. And I'm sure you've been hearing the stories like me, Sonia, since the 90s of Puffy's debaucherous lifestyle and all this crazy stuff that he's into. You know, these accusations are 30 years old.
Yeah.
And it's only now that many people are catching up with it and they're like, oh, who's this guy Diddy? Oh my God. Have you
I
heard
know.
what he's been accused of? Yes, I've been hearing it since about 1994. So
Right.
that's how long he's said to have been up to all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned last time the unfortunate fates of so many of the artists that were signed to Bad Boy Records. The
I'm
most
glad
obvious
you're going to
one is,
get to this as well. Yeah.
yeah,
Go
the
for
most
it.
obvious one is Notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls, who was murdered. We're now hearing that Puffy has been implicated in the murder of Tupac as well, which preceded that of the Notorious B.I.G. by 6 months. That was September '96. So Suge Knight has come out and said that Puffy was, you know, somehow involved in that, implicated in that murder. And the other artists on Bad Boy Records have had unfortunate demises as well. Craig Mack is dead. Black Rob is dead. Shine went to jail, reportedly for a crime committed by Puffy, but he took the rap for Puffy. And when he came out of jail, he converted to Judaism, became a what do you call them, rabbi. And then you have Craig Mack, who became a Christian after his experience at Puffy's label. So you think, what are these people seeing? What are they experiencing at the hands of Puffy to cause them to have these religious conversions as their only way of coping with the
Right.
situation?
Right. And also, he was notoriously bad with his artists in terms of taking their publishing, which was interesting, wasn't it? In recent times, he did a sort of reverse ferret on that. And that was prior to these charges. And one has to wonder whether he was trying to offload stock or whatever, because he knew things were going to start to pile in on him. Who knows? But there's other names as well, you know, like people like Aaliyah, for one example. That's a name that floats around Puffy and Jay-Z and any of those. Obviously, she died prematurely. His name is being raised up now with regard that. What do you think of characters like Jaguar Wright, who are coming out and saying all these things about people like Diddy and Jay-Z and Aaliyah and all of that?
Yeah, I saw a video of hers just this morning, actually, where she's naming all these names, and she's calling out Mary J. Blige.
I
She's
know.
bringing Mary J. Blige into the picture, and she's saying that she knew stuff about Puffy, and she just kept quiet about it. And she's raising DJ Khaled and Rick Ross. Rick Ross is an interesting one because prior to
Right.
becoming a rapper, he was a correctional facilities officer. Officer William Roberts. So he literally worked as a gatekeeper in the jail system, the prison system, and then he came out as a rapper boasting about how many kilos of cocaine he could ship. So that's an invented persona, if ever there was one, but that's an aside. Anyway, that's hip hop for you, I guess. But yeah, Jaguar Wright is naming all these names that have not been brought into the picture before. Also, I was looking at a Vigilant Citizen article just the other day. So, Vigilant Citizen has weighed in on the whole Diddy debacle. And he's mentioned a comment that was made by Denzel Washington, who apparently was an attendee at many of Diddy's parties. And Denzel is said to have said something along the lines of, when it comes to Puffy's parties, you leave 30 minutes before the devil arrives. So Denzel says that whenever he attends his parties, he leaves at a certain time because he knows that certain activities are about to take place and he doesn't want to be there for them. So
I mean,
don't go to the bloody parties then. How about
well,
that?
now that's a really good one, right? Now that's a really good point, and I think this is really interesting because you're saying, like, we've known about this. I didn't actually know about the kind of depth of the debauchery that was being alleged, but I was very aware that Puffy was one of those characters that you didn't necessarily want to be too close to or be around. But I interviewed him several times. I even went to his apartment, and I pretty sure he lied to me about his wrist was bandaged. He said that he'd had a glass and it shattered in his hand. And now with hindsight, I'm wondering whose face did that glass shatter against, right?
You
That's
dodged
what
the bullet going to his place.
I know. And but what he'd set it up in a certain way. I was supposed to interview him at Bad Boy Records. I went to Bad Boy Records. They said, "Oh, Puffer's given you permission just to kind of go around his office on your own to get, you know, rich information about who he is for the article, and then you can go to his flat." And quite young, naive. I was absolutely fine. I did the same with loads of them. Russell Simmons, all of them. They never tried anything with me. And I wonder with hindsight, Mark, whether they just didn't find me attractive. I wasn't their type, or they knew not to mess with me. Who knows? Whatever the reason, the point is that I survived. Nothing ever happened to me untoward. But the other thing I'm interested in, Mark, is police to do. Talking about Epstein, by the way, are you aware that the same prosecutors for Epstein are also the same prosecutors for Puffy?
I wasn't aware of that, but I can't say it surprises me.
I know. Isn't it interesting? Isn't that interesting? So some of them came over to the UK last week to talk to his so-called British friends. Difficult to know who that could be, but highly likely to be people like Russell Brand, Elton John, maybe the Beckhams, maybe Harry and William, who knows? Any thoughts about what he may or may not have done in the UK during his time here?
Well, I did a podcast just a week or so ago with a lady named Layla Wills, who is an investigative journalist out of Chicago. And she's been on top of this Diddy case since day one. And also she's very clued up on the Africa Bambaataa situation, with the allegations being leveled at him. So Layla used to be a hip hop fan, just like us in the 90s, grew up with all this stuff, loved it in the glory years. But she's fallen out of love with the culture and the music now, as have I. I just don't listen to it anymore. I play soulful house these days. But Layla was talking about a visit which Bambaataa made to the UK, which involved Tim Westwood hosting him, and also the London posse, Rodney P and them. And people should listen to that podcast, actually, because Layla tells the story very well.
We'll put a link in the description.
And there was this guy who was down with the London posse, Sippo, his name was. And these guys met Bambaataa in the mid-80s when he came over to the UK. And sometime later, Sippo took his own life. And Layla was speculating on whether something could have happened during that trip where they were running around with Bambaataa, and Westwood was apparently driving them around, according to her. So there's that. But also, I think she addressed Puffy coming to the UK in that conversation as well. But most of the stuff with Puffy seems to have happened in America. So Prince Harry has been named as one of the attendees at his parties. And I think most of the debauchery and the hedonism and stuff took place at Puffy's mansions in the US. So it was British people going out there and just getting involved in that whole mess. I've not heard of any specific things happening on UK shores. So it all seems to have been happening in America. I'm just very surprised that he's been arrested, just going back to that, because I honestly thought he was going to be allowed to walk free.
Above the law. Because there's a lot of, it's highly likely, allegedly, that there were very influential people at his parties. And that includes statesmen, politicians, royalty, actors, businessmen. I mean, you name it. So we are talking about influential people. Do you think this will have a ripple effect on the music industry in any way? Because the music industry will not have changed. I refuse to believe that it's any different than what it was, right? And that is, there's an awful lot of people who are prepared to do pretty much anything to get a break. And so they are vulnerable and they are open to abuse. And I don't think that's ever going to change.
I don't either. And people mustn't view this as something that's just happening within the world of hip hop.
Right.
This could be any genre. We could be talking about country and Western music here, because that's just as corrupt and just as debased as hip hop or any other form of music. It just happens that Diddy is affiliated with the world of hip hop and, you know, black urban music, call it what you will. But this is a good example of what goes on throughout the music industry. And it just happens that Diddy is being put on display and all this stuff is being highlighted and laid, the blame laid at his door. So the biggest fear now is that it's going to be implied that Puffy was up to all this stuff, but it stops with him. he was just this crazy guy and he was allowed
Yeah.
to get out of control.
Yeah.
Nobody really knew what he was doing. We're only just finding out now what he's been doing for the past 30 years. But it's okay because now he's in jail and now he's answering for it. And that's an end to it all, folks. So if we think back to the Jimmy Savile situation in the UK, the way that was framed was Savile was a bad apple who
Yeah.
just happened to slip through the net. Nobody knew what he was doing. He got away with it for 50 odd years. Director General after Director General after Director General of the BBC had no idea what he was doing in the Top of the Pops dressing rooms. He was just very clever and he got away with it. But it's okay, folks, because he's dead now. And so it's all stopped. And it's a great shame that there's all these victims who've been traumatized and their lives damaged by his activities. But, he's gone. So that's all we can do, really. And so we don't want the same to happen with Diddy, Puffy, and for the slant on it to be, he was a bad man that did some bad things. But that's the end of it, folks. Nothing more to see here.
Do you think it's a distraction in any way, Mark?
I do wonder. I always wonder when situations like this make the mainstream news and everyone's talking about it and it's trending on TikTok or whatever. So it makes me wonder what they could be getting people to look over here for so they're not looking over here. But again, it's another example of what goes on in the industry generally, and not even just music. I mean, you could extract it out to the world of politics and the
Yeah.
world of
Yeah.
science, medicine, academia. This sort of stuff is going on everywhere. So we got an opportunity here, I feel. We got an opportunity to use this story to demonstrate as widely as possible to as many people as possible just how corrupt and morally debased the entirety of organized society is. So we mustn't let this opportunity slip.
And how do you think characters like Kevin Hart, Jay-Z, etc., are known to have hung out with Diddy for a very long time? How do you think they're going to fare from this?
I wonder whether Diddy is being thrown under a bus and made an example of to keep other names from being dragged into it. I mean,
Mm.
for example, Clive Davis, who we spoke about earlier. I can't imagine anything's going to happen to Clive Davis. I mean, he's a very old man. I think he's probably into his 90s now. And he's just going to pass away peacefully in his sleep one night without answering for anything that he may or may not have done. But it makes me wonder when there's characters like R. Kelly that they throw under a bus. Is that to protect other high profile names from coming into the picture? And these raids on Diddy's homes, where footage has allegedly been confiscated of his parties, his freak-offs, and all these rich and powerful people in compromising position,
1,500 bottles of baby oil, apparently, that sort of stuff.
right? And bottles of
Very theatrical, isn't it?
GHB and all sorts of stuff being found there. So is this evidence going to be destroyed now so that these other people are protected? And then if anything happens to Puffy, the whole story just goes away, doesn't it?
And also we have to remember about the enablers, don't we? Because an operation like the one that they're describing regarding Puffy could not have been carried out obviously on his own. So the first thing they're going to do, I suspect, is the first thing they'll do is they'll charge the lower people around him, so his assistants, any of his entourage. And I just suspect that we're not ever going to get to the bigger names who were, because what we're hearing is that there were like tiers to the party. Like you say, Denzel Washington said about leave before half hour, but there was also like, you get this part of the party was fine, but then you start to go into the inner sanctum where they were doing more and more kind of, demoralizing, debauched things. And so I suspect that there are so many people that are compromised that we might never get to the nub of what was really taking place. And I also think, Mark, that the fact that all of these people were being filmed, that's not just for leverage for Puffy against these people. That smacks of like Mossad and Secret Services to me.
Exactly. That's the way these agencies get down. That's the kind of material that they like to hold on to, should it ever be needed. If we think back to the Jeffrey Epstein situation, there were so many high profile names
Yeah.
that were said to have been on that Lolita Express, went to his island many, many times. And they've been named, but nothing's happened to them. Ghislaine Maxwell is the only person I'm aware of that was arrested and charged in connection with all this stuff.
But nobody who was apparently had somebody trafficked to. So just the woman, but apparently without customers. She's involved in trafficking, but has no customers. It's so bizarre, isn't it?
It is. And there's so many charges being leveled against Puffy now, about 120 or so. How is it possible to walk away from that? How is it possible for that to fizzle out?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, a really good lawyer might be able to make a couple or a few go away, but how can you make that many go away? So I never thought I'd see this happen, but it seems as if Puffy is going down. He'll probably have a great time in jail, actually, from what I've heard of his lifestyle preferences. He should enjoy shower time very much, particularly if he drops the soap. Yeah, I really do feel as if he's going to be made a scapegoat of here to protect other high profile people. And we can speculate about them. And the likes of us have even heard of them, their
Yeah,
names being drawn into it. But
yeah.
as far as the mainstream is concerned, and as far as it all going on the public record, these other people are going to be left out of the frame, I feel.
I think that's a very fair point. Mark, please keep us updated. Anything that you hear on this, please let me know, because I think this is a fast evolving and changing story. But I agree with you. I think it is important for us to keep this highlighted, because people need to know what is taking place, the level of abuse that takes place, and how vulnerable other people are. And I think we need to get away from this whole idea of children always wanting to be famous at any cost, because that is what leaves them vulnerable. Everybody, this is the rather brilliant Mark Devlin. Take good care of yourself, Mark. Have a brilliant week.
Cheers, Sonia. Thank you.
Lovely to see you.
All the
Lovely
best.
to see Mark, isn't it? The thing I love about Mark, he has this real measured tone when he's discussing things, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think I'm going to be able to take this off now. I need to take that off because it's hurting my head. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me, beautiful people? I want to show you something. Thank you for coming on, Mark, says Healing the Silence. I want to show you something. This, I think, is interesting. But A Battle left a comment on after Friday's show saying, rap and hip hop promoting misogyny, sexual violence, gun violence, drugs, etc. for decades. Nobody said a word. And I think that is actually a fair point. And I have to say that I was involved in the promotion of those things, and I did do it from an altruistic perspective. I believe that there was a lot of social injustice that was taking place, and hip hop was highlighting it. But like Mark, I'm not part of it anymore and have no interest in it whatsoever. And I see it just as kind of like really exploitative. But about 14, 15 years ago, I wrote a piece, actually. I think it was for the Independent newspaper. It's probably still online. And it talks about how guilty I feel about kind of promoting that kind of gangster culture. So I think that's a very fair point that Battle makes there. Very fair point indeed. Right. I want to actually continue this conversation just briefly, because I think this is interesting. And that is, we talk about those cops coming over to the UK to look at UK people. Well, obviously, one of Puff Daddy's great associates was one Russell Brand. And they were together in the movie Get Him to the Greek. And basically, Puffy played himself. Let me just bring up that image. There he is. You can actually see Puffy there chasing after Jonah Hill and Russell Brand. I went back yesterday to look at this film. I'd watched it before. It was funny the first time around I watched it. I watched it again, not yesterday. I didn't watch it in its entirety. I watched bits of it. It is horrible. It's like it promotes rape. It's just horrible. It talks about how drugging people and then raping them. All of this is in Get Him to the Greek. Puffy absolutely plays his own character, and he comes over as really creepy. And I think Russell Brand is playing his own character as well. Both of them are really creepy. But here's what creeped me out, people. Here's what really creeped me out. Was Russell Brand is a pop star, and the aim is to get him to the Greek. It is an establishment to celebrate the 10th anniversary of his band. And the thing is, does anybody remember what Russell Brand's band was called in that film? It was called Infant Sorrow. I'm sorry, how creepy is that? The furry war beyond belief, right? That both Puffy and Russell Brand were kind of hugging and cuddling and everything. That's right. Infant Sorrow. How creepy is that? I'm sorry, that's really creepy. A band called Infant Sorrow. And now we know about the allegations towards both Puffy and Russell Brand. And honestly, when I realized that again yesterday, I was like, oh, that just creeps me out. It creeps me out. Why did they come up with that name for a band for Russell Brand? And by the way, one of his songs as Infant Sorrow is I Am Jesus. So there you go. I know it's creepy. It's very, very creepy. And but the other thing that was really funny, this amused me. I've got to add this to the stage. Did anybody see this? This is also resurfaced now. It's a clip from the 2013 Golden Globe Awards, and Puffy was presenting an award to U2. And when they came up on stage, and Puffy was like kissing everybody, and he went to kiss Bono, and Bono swerved him. Can you see that? The second picture, it's actually online. I mean, how bad do you have to be for Bono not to want to kiss you? Right? How bad would you have to be? Ugh. Creepy, creepy. Wendy Williams, the host, by the way, she'd been telling us for years about this sort of stuff. Look what happened to her. Mind you, she's a nasty piece of work herself. But her husband cheated. He had a long-term affair. He had a baby with his mistress. She ended up having so much plastic surgery. It was actually uncomfortable to look at Wendy. She can barely walk these days. But Wendy Williams in the 90s was telling people about all these people and got into a lot of trouble for it. A lot of trouble.